Welcome. I'm Karen Griffith-Gryga, Chief Investment Officer for Dreamit, and welcome to our continuing educational seminar series that Dreamit produces. Today we're talking about professions of a VC lawyer, and you have three extremely experienced, knowledgeable, and fun lawyers on our panel today, and they're going to share their wisdoms with you. So let's do quick 2-minute intros of each of you. Would love to hear from you, kind of your career path and what types of rounds that you have experience with. Jeff?
Sure. Hi, everybody. I'm Jeff Bodie. I'm from Morgan Lewis. I started out as a startup lawyer way back in 1998. I thought I would be a litigator, but then a guy by the name of Steve Goodman brought me into a room with some entrepreneurs and asked me what I thought of their business and whether I would invest. And so I said, I'm hooked, and I've been doing it ever since then. I've seen anything ranging from Series A and seed financings and note financings all the way up to, I think, Series H, I want to say. There's some life sciences companies who have raised a lot of money over the years. So, and anything in between. So I'm looking forward to talking to you about all things soups and nuts related to financings.
Excellent. Dave?
Hello, I'm Dave Nelson with Cozen O'Connor. I actually, before I went back and decided to become a lawyer, I worked for a startup company that was from this region and found it so exciting that it enabled me to pay for 5 years of graduate school. Came back on the legal side and, had spent a lot of time working, just like Jeff, in almost every stage of VC financing, from, the first angel funds that come in up to the later rounds, C's, D's, E's, F's, maybe not a double H, but up there, but also, working with the companies on their exits and also representing the VCs themselves in a variety of transactions. Hopefully I can also shed some light and wisdom on the process.
Excellent. Rich?
And I'm Rich Cohen with Duane Morris. Frighteningly enough, I've been at Duane for 20 years now. Started off, I was done a lot of securities law, M&A work, and about 10 years ago, I had gone to Wharton undergrad and was trying to figure out how to get back involved in that community. I've always been interested in various business concepts and such, and it's a much different experience when you're helping out a public company than when you're helping out a startup. When you're working with a public company, the CEO might care about the specific question, but with a VC, or with a emerging company, it's definitely a more wide range of advice. So, like Jeff and Dave do a lot of seed funding, then it funnels down to the various series, and then M&A, and in my case, helping companies go public.
Excellent. So what we're going to start out with is the whole concept of fundraising. So we work obviously with our entrepreneurs and get them in front of a lot of investors. What, in your experience, is the time range that's needed for entrepreneurs to raise a round? And what's kind of your top 2 or 3 ideas to help shorten that time period?
Sure. This is Jeff. I'll jump in. And you'll hear this is the if we had a family feud and you're going to decide what the number one lawyer answer would be at the top of the list, I think the answer would be it depends. But I think the real answer is are you ready to pitch to investors? So the number one thing I would say to startups to truncate the process is be ready. Be a company that you think is fundable. And if you're not, then don't waste your time on the process. So I think you have to have an honest, hard conversation to figure out, am I the type of company that the particular type of investors that I'm going to target are going to fund? And if so, then you figure out the right way to approach them. We're going to get into that a little bit more detail later and what the strategy is. And maybe it's a couple in the first instance and then cast a broader net. But if you're not ready,
when you say ready, you mean metrics and milestones ready?
Yeah, I mean, do you have the right opportunity that you're pursuing? Have you achieved a certain level of traction in your business? Do you have the right team in place? Have you had discussions with people who are familiar with fundraising, and do they think that you're the type of company that is fundable, or are you just kind of wasting your time right now and you should keep your head down building the business and finding the right product and market fit?
So you're talking about doing the pre-work, meeting with investors, meeting with your network to get feedback on the metrics and milestones. So when should entrepreneurs start doing that prior to going out and fundraising?
I think it's a fine line, because you don't want to waste too much time getting feedback and getting everybody's assertions. But I think there's a role for that process to play from day one of your startup. I think as and when you're building your idea, building your team, building your product, you should be getting feedback from advisors, so that, one, you can start to build relationships with those advisors and see who you're going to have deeper relationships with, and also set the stage and set the tones for the type of people who may morph from being advisors into investors or have relationships with investors, so that you can really kind of get things going from day one. But you have to be careful. You don't want to just be out there getting feedback. You have to have your head down a little bit too, so that working on your business.
So give me a range. I need a range besides it depends.
Well, I mean, first of all, VCs can be tracking companies for months or years, so it's always good to get in front of them, and that's really important, right? Because if you give them in an initial meeting when they're not ready to fund with you, if you tell them what your timeline looks like, what your milestones look like, and then you achieve them, there's certainly an ability to show that you're able to say, put your money where your mouth is, basically do what you're going to do. I mean, if you get a term sheet, it's going to take, 4 to 6 weeks to do a deal. And the general advice is it's always going to take longer than you think it's going to take. People always come to us and say they're going to close the deal by X date, and we shake our heads and smile and say, yeah, we'll do it. But it always takes a little bit longer than you could possibly think.
Yeah, I would agree. 4 to 6 weeks if it's kind of a fun type deal. If it's more of a angel $300,000-$500,000 convertible note past the hat round, I think you could do that in 2 to 3 weeks from when you first have kind of interest from that lead. And then the real challenge is how long does it take to pitch these people? And that takes time. It depends on how many people are interested in getting in and what sort of sense of urgency you can create around the deal.
So you guys are talking specifically time from term sheet to docs and execution of docs. For a traditional Series A or whatever is 4 to 6 weeks of getting the docs done. For a convertible note, could be like 3 weeks. Dave, your thoughts?
Just to build on a couple of things that were said, I think it's really important for a startup to remember that pitching for funds is part of the sales process of the company. Everyone puts together, as Jeff said, a pitch book, and as Rich had mentioned, there's going to be different investors who may want to track. My advice to the startup is that this is your first opportunity to sell the business and the products you're doing, and where you are in that process is going to lead to a lot to what type of investor and what taste for risk that investor is going to have, depending upon where you are in the process. I think Steve Barsh, I know he used to give these speeches at a lot of Dreamit companies about de-risking your business. You've got to be ready to say, if I'm at a certain spot and I don't have the product completely developed, how do I sell to the investor the money I might need to get to the next part? How do I make that investor comfortable? And what type of investor is going to have the taste for that type of risk at that stage? And as both guys are saying, I think you go out day one, you just need to know where you are, and that's going to lead to what type of investor is going to be the watcher versus the person who's going to put the money down, and the type and structure of the investment that's going to be. But as a startup, I think you've got to be ready to do that from the get-go, and be ready to make the right sales pitch depending upon where you are in the business development process.
So just assume it's a Dreamit company, so it's tremendously well prepared. We've had them out in customer immersions. They've done kind of the pre-work. They've met with investors. They feel like they have a good sense of metric and milestones that they've achieved. What's the time frame?
How much money are we raising, Karen?
Okay, we're doing first, let's talk Series Seed. We're doing a $1 to $1.5 million Series Seed, and then Series A, $3 to $5 million Series A. Two different examples.
I would say 2 months from when you first start talking to investors to get the seed done, and I'd say 2.5 to 3 for the Series A.
The big difference is the due diligence, right? When people are putting up more money, they are more likely to do more extensive due diligence. So if you're talking about an institutional investor making a placeholder investment, they're going to do much less due diligence than if they're putting up a significant amount of money. And then the lawyers will be involved, as they say, and it's definitely going to take more time and effort.
And I think the wild card there is the lead, right? When you find the lead, if it takes you a week to find the lead, then you can roll from there. If it takes you a month and a half to find the lead, then you have issues, right? So I think really figuring out who's really going to be that first person to commit and write the check will ultimately dictate the timing.
Yeah, and in terms of shortening the time frame, which is something we had talked about before, if the company is organized and has their stuff together and can even show their charter documents, they're going to ask for a bunch of simple things, right? That if they can show that they have these things together and you're not going back and chasing things, you look better as a potential target. You're able to answer all the questions. That's going to significantly shorten the time frame if you have everything in one place and are able to basically give everything the investor wants at once.
Yeah. So I tell all our teams, make sure you anticipate every type of due diligence question you can get, and at least have a first cut at that, and have all your corporate documents together. And that certainly helps facilitate. I mean, I tell my entrepreneurs to prepare for a 6-month process and to talk to 50 to 100 people.
Yeah, but if you look unorganized during your due diligence process, people might think you're disorganized in regular business life, and that's a problem.
Oh, absolutely. People look at responsiveness and organization as an indication of how you conduct your business. Okay, so the biggest challenge in fundraising, besides all the others, is getting that lead. What's kind of some of the best strategic approaches that you've seen to getting that lead? And sometimes it's kind of challenging as an early stage company to transform soft commitments into a lead. What advice do you have for the companies on this exact issue?
I mean, you have to approach the right investor. So there are investors for all types of different businesses, and they invest at particular stages. So there's due diligence involved on the part of the company to make sure that they are approaching the very best targets, or else you're going to be spinning your wheels. Because you need a champion at a VC firm, right? So if the VC firm isn't familiar with that space, it's much less likely to come up with a champion to push it to the finish line.
I would echo that. I mean, I think you need someone who, for whatever it is, the right size of check for the size of raise that you're doing, is someone who can A, write that check, and B, is going to be a champion and be passionate about your venture, because you're going to then be able to leverage that into commitments from other people. But that's not an easy thing to do, and I think it's about building relationships at the end of the day. You have to build a relationship with that particular investor who you think is going to be capable of being a lead. And that's hard to do. So you need to kiss a lot of frogs to figure out who the right people are. And the more targeted you can be about it, the better off you're going to be. But you have to build a relationship with someone who's going to be willing to take a leap when others have not yet been willing to take that leap. So I think it's the more they're familiar with the type of business that you're building, the more that they're familiar with taking chances and taking risks on companies similar to yours, the better off you're going to be.
Just to echo both of those points, I think that's really important, is the finding the right, more strategic type of investor. You see a lot of people going out raising money for the sake of raising money. So they have a bunch of people, they've got some money, but none of them are really there for a commitment. It's just sort of a little money here, a little money there. Look how great it is to invest into a startup. a better approach, even if you find or are able to develop a good relationship, is maybe to try and get that person to invest in an earlier stage and keep him on as an advisor, or if he's monitoring, then that would slow the due diligence process for the next larger round dramatically, in addition to opening up and getting commitment out of a good relationship. But as I think as both Jeff and Rich have echoed, that's it's a difficult thing to do, and it's going to take a lot of work.
Yeah, and if you're going to have multiple contacts with someone over a relatively long period of time leading up to someone being a lead, I mean, one thing you want to think about is over that period of time, your contact is asking you questions, is giving you advice. And if you listen to all VCs, right, you're going to have 5 different pieces of advice. You can't go 5 different directions. But I think what you hear from VCs when we sit in meetings like at Ben Franklin, when we're on the investment committee with Jeff and I are, and Karen's on the committee, and you listen to VCs, a lot of times you'll hear them say, oh, I met them a long time ago. And they want to know that you're willing to listen and that you're willing to learn, because they're going to be a long-term partner with you. And if they think you're just going to ignore advice that everyone is providing and just go on your way, that might not be the best fit for the VC. So you should be listening, because they're saying things that they feel are valuable.
Yeah, and one of the biggest ways that entrepreneurs can help themselves is to build their execution credibility. So when I talk to other VCs and hear them rave about entrepreneurs, they say, well, they told me they were going to do this, and they came back within their time period and did exactly what they needed to do. So when everyone here talks about building relationships, it's not only about building relationships, but it's establishing a track record of execution as well. How often do you guys help with introductions to investors and VCs with the companies you work with?
Yeah, I mean, it's a very common part of the practice. We want our clients to be successful, so we will introduce them to all sorts of various aspects of our networks, which include VCs. And we're actually doing it for the reason that you just referenced, right? It's about execution. So what you do is you introduce someone to somebody, maybe they're not yet ready for investment by that investor, but they can build a relationship with that investor that way. That investor can start to track them, can give them some feedback, suggest that they meet with certain people and suggest that they do certain things. And then the entrepreneur is able to do that and report back to the VC. And now we've got something going. And I find that the best entrepreneurs are those ones who do move forward and execute and take advantage of the relationships that they're referred into.
We do it, as often as, almost in every client we have. It's mutually beneficial for both, for the whole network, and part of building a whole community. It just makes everyone stronger. And also, building strategic relationships, even if it doesn't come down to a commitment or a financing, it's, we're available. It helps our VC clients. It helps our emerging business clients. And, in general, you never know. It may, as Jeff was saying, it may not be ripe right now, but it's important to make that introduction. Those people are going to remember that, and it'll be helpful later on.
Okay, great. So what common mistakes do you see most often entrepreneurs make in trying to attract VC investment? So we've talked about preparedness. We've talked about building relationships. Are there other common mistakes that you see?
I mean, I would say the biggest one is casting too broad of a net. So you just blast everybody, try to meet with everybody you can, rather than being a little bit more targeted in the first instance, and also using some of your earlier meetings and interactions as a way to figure out what's going to give investors pause, and then be able to react to that and both improve the pitch and B, more importantly, improve the business to address those concerns. Whereas if you just go right out from day one and meet with a ton of investors and they all kind of poo-poo things because there's some holes, now you've kind of tainted the waters a little bit with those investors. Whereas if you take a little bit more of a targeted approach and figure out where the holes are and build from there, I think it makes for a more efficient and effective process long-term.
It's extremely time consuming to go on a fundraising process. So you really do have to be targeting what you're doing. And if not, you're going to be spinning your wheels. And anytime you spend fundraising is time you're spending away from building the business. And as you get closer to a wall where you're about to run out of money, you're going to be spending more and more time fundraising and less time running the business, which can be a problem. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy of a downward spiral.
Yeah, I think you involved in that process. It certainly, Rich is absolutely right. It's time consuming. Sometimes you can find yourself up against the wall. But I think it's the common theme we're saying here: start early, and don't overlook the potential better, more strategic relationship. And keep your eyes glazed over when people just come up and want to write you checks. Getting the money in faster and being impressed that I've raised X amount may not be the absolute best. If a little more time and effort would get you a better, longer term champion.
Yeah, and don't forget strategic investors. I mean, that's an interesting point, right? You have the VCs out there. They might be your lead, but VC might be more likely to lead the round if they know that there are strategics who are invest, or alternatively, you might have strategics that want to invest, but they're not professional investors and they're waiting for the VC. But having the strategics and having that name in connection with an offering can be a real help. And by the way, helpful for your business, right? Because they add something that a professional investor might not add.
Yeah, in fact, strategics were 24% of the capital invested in 2015. So they're a big part of the equation. There's just a lot to think about when getting strategics involved, as you guys know, so from experience. So, you get to the point, you've been through the process, and Rich, you raise a very good point that one of the biggest challenges that entrepreneurs face is operating their business while raising capital. And that one of the best things that you can do for yourself while raising capital is to continue the momentum of the business. So we kind of have all talked about the fact that relationship development is so important early on. Do you have advice in general for the entrepreneurs, maybe what percentage of time or how to incorporate the relationship building into their day-to-day process so that they're both operating as well as kind of building a foundation for the relationships on the capital side?
Sure. I mean, I think one is be organized about it. So it can be distracting if you're just kind of going on angel lists and going on here and there and talking to a bunch of different people. So you want to be organized. I think build your hit list out, whether it's some sort of whatever sort of CRM you use or Trello or even Google Docs, whatever it is, to keep track of the people that you're talking to. And I would say be strategic about the meetings themselves. Just meeting with someone who can write a check. Try to meet with people who are going to help you and provide value to you, even in that limited interaction, so that you don't feel like, even if that person doesn't write a check, that you didn't get something out of that meeting, because maybe it's a relationship with a potential customer, or maybe they can introduce you to talent or give you some sort of feedback related to the business that you'll find valuable. Try to meet with those types of people. But I think you can split up the team. So maybe it's one person on the team is focused primarily on the fundraising. I think it tends to be the CEO for the most part, but other people can help with some of the legwork and some of the relationship building. But you have to build your business, so that has to be the primary focus.
And I would also say,
no, go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead, Rich. I would also say, just building on that and some other things we said, that going through a financing, at least from my perspective, is part of selling your business. When you talk to, the more people you talk to, whether they're VCs or strategics, you're getting the word out on the street about that you have a great idea. So be prepared with that message and be disciplined about it. And that's going to help market the business as well. It's going to go, that discussion you're having with the one VC or the strategic, it shouldn't necessarily be viewed as the end of it. That person's going to, put the word out on the street that there's something exciting going on. And this should be the same or similar message you're giving on the operations side to attract talent, to build the product, to market the product, to get revenue. I mean, that's you know, in the end game, the building a business is about selling a great idea, and that should be, you know, I'd say look at it as part and parcel of the same process.
Yeah, and there are places where people who invest in your type of company, either by industry or by geography, are forced to hang out. So if you can get invited to some of those main industry or just general VC events where you're going to see these people, and if nothing else, just check in with them and say hi and mention, you know, some of the things you had been working on and how you've been achieving those goals, that's going to be extremely helpful.
Yeah, I find it useful to set metrics. So I try to tell my entrepreneurs, you know, even when you're in the core building phase, try to have 2 to 3 networking meetings a week and just incorporate it into your daily routine. And early on, it's just advice and feedback and guidance. But if you kind of incorporate that into your daily habits, it really helps a lot. Okay, let's talk about negotiating the term sheet. What do you guys see as common mistakes for early stage VCs or early stage entrepreneurs to make when negotiating with VCs on a term sheet?
Well, I mean, first of all, it's interesting because, and this is sort of one of the secrets, you'd like to say it's brain surgery, right? And there's a lot of negotiation going on, but a lot of the terms are pretty common. I mean, especially if you're doing a seed stage investment and you're talking about a convertible note round, there are probably 4 terms you're negotiating in the entire document. And you know, we have some forms. That's why that sort of fundraising for an early stage company is so efficient and doesn't create a huge amount of legal fees. As you move up the food chain, there's more and more negotiation. You know, a Series A even, especially if people are following the NVCA forms, which a lot of VCs do, at least in some respects, you know, it's not going to be ridiculous. You just want to make sure that as an entrepreneur, you're not being greedy and turn off the professional investor. I mean, I think that's the biggest problem you see.
So greedy in terms of valuation, what are you talking about?
Yeah, I mean, there's market. You need to go figure out what's market for the main terms, right? So it's both the valuation, which is the main one. You have the liquidation preference. The VC is going to be concerned about what the board rights and veto rights are. So you need to go educate yourself as a company about what those rights are, what's important to you. It's a relatively small universe, and you don't want to look foolish when you're negotiating those terms. You want to be somewhere in the range of market, even if you're on the high end for a company. You know, you need to be there.
I mean, I would say you want to generate as much interest you can in the deal, right? The more interest you generate in the deal, the better off you're going to be when negotiating terms, right? If a VC thinks they're the only game in town and they are the only game in town, you're going to have a lot less leverage as an entrepreneur. If you have kind of multiple potential people who want to get into a deal and it kind of has that sense of being a hot deal, I think you'll have a little bit more leverage. But I would also agree, you don't want to just go for the highest valuation necessarily, right? I think you need to evaluate, if you have multiple options, who those options are and what's the best option for your company. And it's the right combination of terms and partner. And I would probably skew more towards who the right partner is, even if you haven't optimized for terms with that partner, all the things being equal. But I agree, just understanding what sort of terms that investor is likely to ask for and what your ability to respond is going to be, and knowing that what things impact economics. So it's not just valuation. There are other things that impact economics besides valuation.
Such as?
Such as is the liquidation preference participating or non-participating? Are there dividends that accrue and are payable on exit? What's the size of the option pool and how does that impact the pre-money valuation? What are the vesting terms and control terms and amendment terms that are going to need to be complied with on a go-forward basis when you do future rounds? I would say those are the main ones.
Thanks.
If I could just further what Jeff said, I think what he said is really important there. And what I see people make a lot of mistakes is that they'll tend to get into a negotiation process and want to pick, they congratulate themselves. I think I got a little bit more out of this guy than the other guy. I think that's, missing the forest for the leaves or whatever the old expression is. As Jeff said, it's at some point, if you're, as Rich was saying, if you're within market and you really think you have or have found the right strategic person, that's probably, where you want to go. Hemming and hawing over little details may not be the best particularly at an earlier stage where there's so much risk involved. You could be giving up the strategic partner that's going to get you to be the billion-dollar company. And, after winning 1% on the whatever de minimis interest rate a convertible note is going to take, it's not worth it. The other thing I see is a little frustrating, but sometimes it's impossible to get out of. There's an old expression, if you offer the terms, or if you're in a position where you're offering the terms, that's the best deal you're ever going to get. If you can get the other side to come up with terms, now you've got something to work with. That can be very hard to overcome, particularly at an earlier stage. The best advice I can say to people is, if you're selling your business right, you got to make that person want to do the investment. And then you can usually, put yourself in a position where they're saying, well, this is where I'd like to do it. Now you've got a discussion to improve. If you've already been put back and, well, what terms are you offering? It's a little riskier. Yes, you should definitely go look at what's market. But again, that's probably the best terms you're ever going to get.
So what's the best source of market data on valuations and terms that you guys have found?
I think a lot of law firms will put out commentary. So you can find, particularly some of the West Coast firms will do Silicon Valley type deals, but that's not necessarily market for the particular jurisdiction that you're in. So you need to figure out who the investors are that you're seeking. I think the best way is to have, this is a great question to ask advisors, right? It's a great question to say, oh, Karen, what are you seeing, in Philadelphia-based deals or Boston-based deals, or Jeff or Rich or Dave, what are you seeing in these deals for a company like mine? Market will vary though, because, are you a serial entrepreneur with a big opportunity in a huge market, or is this your first time and the team's not yet round out and the market opportunity is a little bit smaller? So, or are you in a hot space? So I think the type of deal and the type of entrepreneur will dictate value as well.
And the stage, right? I mean, the earlier you are, the more narrow what market it is than as you expand out.
And I think it was the NVCA does a study with PricewaterhouseCoopers, generally, that talks about terms and what's standard at that point in time. It's not, they'll give valuation ranges. I guess they do it by sub-industry, if I'm remembering correctly, but then they talk about kind of what's the standard by region of different terms. So I find that that's, a good resource to pursue. Do you guys find that VCs have kind of a fingerprint on what they traditionally look for in the terms that they ask for? And is it useful to ask around other entrepreneurs about the VCs and what their typical approach is?
Yeah, I think VCs definitely have a footprint. So I think if you can get visibility either directly into entrepreneurs or portfolio companies of those VCs, that's the best, or indirectly through people that that are advisors to those companies or have otherwise done business with those companies. I mean, in this day and age, there's a lot of information floating around and things are very much more transparent than they used to be. So I think you can get a pretty good sense, but some VC behavior will change just based on how hot the deal is, right? So if they're trying to, I know a number of VCs, if they're trying to get into a hot deal, will relax their standards a little bit, whereas if they know they're the only game in town, they'll stick to their guns a little bit more. So a lot of it depends on how excited they are to get into the opportunity.
I think that's right. I think you have to remember with VCs, particularly if they're more experienced or in a VC firm that has multiple funds at whatever stage, they certainly have a team of experienced people. They have a comfortable way that they go about it, and they have the experience behind them. We've done this before. This is where we've been successful. This is the way we like to do deals. And I think we've given, as Jeff says, there are going to be exceptions, but that's I think largely what you'll see. I also know because we help put together some of the blueprints for some of the VC firms. So you can also talk to us just because we'll have some knowledge. But, there's a comfort level given the amount of risk in the private and earlier stage businesses. This is the way these people have been successful before. That's the environment they're comfortable working in, and you are going to see some differences, and there are people out there who've done a deal with one or the other that'll know that XYZ firm does it this way, why ABC firm does it slightly different.
Is it ever appropriate for an entrepreneur to throw out a valuation? I mean, throw out meaning put it out there, not put it in the trash can.
Well, we've given the last caveat that if you throw it out there, that may be the best thing you're ever going to get. I mean, sure, it's not. You're gonna have to talk about it at some point. So, I mean, I haven't gotten. I've I've had some clients who've thrown out some pretty amazing valuations. I haven't seen anyone just walk out of the room if it sounded a little ridiculous. It's one way to learn. You get an impression, but with that caveat that if you throw something out there and you think you're trying to impress and you undershoot a little, maybe you could have gotten something better. But
yeah, I think some of it depends on the sophistication of the investor, and also whether you already have the lead or not. Obviously, if you already have the lead, then you're just kind of trying to round out the round, and you've already established valuation to some degree. I think, look, this is no different than buying a used car, right? And who throws out the first price? I think the challenge with throwing valuation out there is, what if it doesn't stick? If we're with kind of a small group of angel investors, then maybe, and you're just not getting a good sense that the investor that you're talking to is going to be driving the valuation discussion, then I think you could suggest a range. I don't like a specific value, because value and the ultimate percentage an investor owns could vary based on the size of the round. And so I like to have a range if I'm going to come out with a value based upon how much I'm raising. But generally, we'd like to have the investors set that. But you can't. I mean, sometimes you have to push the issue a little bit more, particularly if you're dealing with the types of investors where it's herding cats and it's not really any of them is used to driving that process. But if it's a typical, true VC, I think the VC is used to driving that process.
Yeah, but you have to have something in your mind in case you're asked about it, right? Because if they ask you, you at least have to have something to come back with, even if it's high, right? I mean, it's like Trump running for president, right? No one believes he's going to do what he's going to say, but it's a negotiation. So as long as you have something that people will listen to, people understand it. It's going to change over time, but you have to understand. And by the way, you also have to understand the VC and the types of sizes of investment they make, because that impacts everything. Because if they only make investments that are $1 million, you need to think about how much that $1 million will be as a percentage of your company, and the valuation goes to that because it's all a mathematical equation.
Yeah, I think entrepreneurs really, you raise a good point, right? There's the basic, you have to be aware of what the funds, what, industries are interested in, what their typical size check is, but you also have to be aware of where they are in their fund life, right? It's different characteristics when they're at the beginning of the fund versus end of fund, and the particular best champion for you in the firm, how many deals they've done recently, right? All that influence kind of the dynamics around it. Just to anyone listening to this live, we are going to open it up for questions in a little less than 10 minutes. So just be thinking about your questions. What about safes and kisses? Are you guys seeing a lot of safes and kisses, and kind of what are you seeing versus what's more popular today in kind of the convertible note area?
I mean, I'll start. I would say from the early stage fundraising, I would say 80% of the deals we see are convertible notes. Safes are, I guess, that they're somewhat popular. I mean, certainly on the West Coast, since they grew up there, they like using them more. But on the East Coast, Philadelphia, New York, I think you see more convertible note deals, and then some seed financings. I mean, I think for the most part, especially the very early companies, punting on valuation is probably at that point the the de facto default way to go.
Are you guys seeing any kisses? They keep
Yes,
it
and I think
simple securities. I'm not offering kisses around here.
the keep it simple security and the safe, the other acronym, I think I agree with Rich that I am seeing those. I think though in this area, I think generally in the Northeast, you have a different type of early stage investor, particularly if the person's more experienced. Maybe it's a generational thing, but they seem to be a lot more comfortable with a more traditional convertible note. And maybe some of the reaction is sort of more visceral. What is this thing? What is this funny acronym? It doesn't seem to have all the bells and whistles I'm accustomed to, even though you can try and explain it as they're really all there. It's just phrased a little differently. But I think you'll find in this region in the Northeast, there's more of called a conservative approach versus on the West Coast that's willing to sort of put some money in at that early, we're going to punt the valuation stage then in this region. But we do see them.
Yeah, I would say in terms of safes, you don't see them too much in a larger kind of convertible notice type round in that $500 to $1 million range. Where I think you will see them a fair amount is if someone's just raising 25 grand, 50 grand, 100 grand, then that's a nice convenient vehicle to do that. I think the only time you really see them is if the entrepreneur really has a lot of leverage and that's the deal that he wants to impose and the investors want to get in on it. That's a fair thing to do. Now kisses, I would say they're a little more common in the sense that there are two types of kisses, right? And one type of kiss is basically a convertible note. It's just called a kiss, right? So you will see that as just a, hey, here's an easy form of document that's out there that we can all just kind of latch onto quick. But ultimately, I think it really depends on the type of investor involved. But I think you're seeing a little bit of more movement towards that, even in the non-entrepreneur leverage scenario for very small financings. But in terms of the larger financings, at least in Philadelphia, it's more convertible notes. I would say New York, probably you see a fair amount more traction. Boston, I would say probably more convertible note.
And what's the difference, Jeff, between a safe and a kiss?
Well, I think some of it is just, I mean, first of all, there's all different types of safes. There are safes that have 4 or 5 different terms associated with them, and you can actually, the best thing to do is just, there's a nice description right on the website where you can access the safes that shows you the difference in the terms. But a safe is really a convertible note without an interest rate and without a set maturity date. That's really the difference. And a KISS is essentially the same thing. What I would say is the KISS is maybe a little more aggressive in some of the provisions, such as the premium on exit or how it converts. The SAFE is even simpler than the KISS in terms of its approach to things. So it's a very, very simple document that essentially punts almost everything to a future document other than very certain discrete terms.
I think one of the
summaries of both right online that are very easy to read.
I think that one distinction, I think it could be driving some of the differences in the coast-wise or regional-wise. It's my understanding that the KISS in its sort of simple forms is an instrument designed to facilitate like a crowdfunding environment with very, very small investments from a larger group of investors. And I think you'll find more sophisticated, experienced investors, even if they're only going to put down $25,000 or $50,000 a pop, want a little more meat in the instrument that they're investing in. They want more data points. They want more opportunity to look and see what's going on. And so if you're going out and marketing to those people with an instrument that's, if I invest $5,000, you're just trying to raise from a lot of people. You're not going to have a lot of obligations on the company to sort of support your investors. And I think you get the distaste from some of the more experienced people, even if they're willing to put in lower amounts of money at a very early stage. So that can be kind of the drawback as a mismatch between the type of investor and the instrument.
Okay.
And you hear people talk about the fact that safes are simpler. I mean, there's really only a couple terms off. So in terms of legal fees, right, if you're paying for it, everyone has their form documents for all of these things. So you're really not going to be saving money by doing one thing or the other. It's really these two terms that are in convertible notes, for instance, that aren't in all KISSes and certainly aren't in safes.
So I think if you have a lot of investors who are really familiar with this landscape, then KISSes or safes might be an option, right? If on the other hand, your investors are just a little bit more comfortable with doing things the same way they've always done it, I don't think at the end of the day convertible notes are really that different, and can be a good vehicle for them.
So the bottom line is know your audience and know what vehicles are appropriate for that audience, because this isn't, I think the entrepreneurs that have the most trouble kind of approach a fundraising scenario formulaically, and they don't try to understand their audience and what's appropriate for them. One more thing we'll talk about before questions open up. What about venture debt? Tell us a little bit about venture debt and when venture debt is really kind of appropriate in your opinion.
Sure. I mean, look, I think that the short answer is if you haven't yet raised an equity round, you don't need to worry about venture debt. Venture debt is essentially a bolt-on mechanism that gets deployed after a venture round, and it's typically pretty closely done after that round. And effectively, what the lender is, and there are certain types of lenders, SVB, Silicon Valley Bank, or Square One, and there's probably about 3 or 4 others, Bridge Bank, number of them that specialize in this, but they have relationships with the VC funds, and effectively what they're doing is instead of applying more traditional lender criteria, they're willing to follow on to those venture investors and take a little bit extra risk because of the VC's involvement. And effectively what the entrepreneur and the company and the VC funds are able to do is to leverage the equity around and get a little bit extra working capital or some discrete ways to use debt out of that round that they can use to grow their business. But it is typically not something that is done prior to at a minimum, the Series A. If the Series A is large enough, then you can consider a bolt-on venture debt after that. Sometimes it takes it till the B. That's effectively what it is. It's a different financing tool.
Right. Okay, we have Rich here from Kermit that would like to ask a question. Go ahead, Rich.
Thank you. Great session today, by the way. We're using an online tool through Dreamit called Gust, and 3 of you might already be familiar with this platform. One of the things that we have to do as the entity is put together this profile, and inside of Gust requires us to take a stab at how much money we're raising, as well as what the valuation is. It's not a field we can leave blank. So I'm wondering, from your perspective, how much weight or stock should we put into this number? Is it something we can easily dismiss during a conversation if things kind of go a different way? Or should we really kind of sweat over what goes into that profile?
Well, it depends who's seeing it, but I mean, based upon everything that Jeff was talking about before, for instance, you don't want to be low. So it probably is a number that you need to think about, because if it's anything that's going to set expectations, even if Dreamit's going to use it to go talk to their investor sources, which maybe they might do, you want to definitely think about it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure what the field provides or doesn't provide. If it provides a range, at a minimum, my advice would be put in a range. That particularly on the proceeds side, it's really 2 variables, right? How much you're raising is going to impact the percentage that the investor owns at the end of the day. So if you can have plugs and pulls that way, I would suggest it. You don't want to go too high because you don't want people to just dismiss you out of hand. But on the other hand, you don't want to leave anything on the table if you got to put something out there.
Yeah, and amount raised is a big deal, right? Because it's not something we talked about today. You could spend an entire hour talking about what's the right amount to raise in an offering, because you don't want to raise too little, because then you'll be constantly fundraising. You don't want to raise too much because maybe you can get to a better valuation for the company. So that's something you need to really think about in setting that range.
Rich, does it give you, sorry, Dave, go ahead.
I was just going to say also that just to bring back a lot of the other things we were discussing is if you're going to, and when you put that number in, just be prepared to justify it or be able to talk about it. It can't just be something that it's a wish. You can always look at it as an opportunity to sound like you've really thought about the business and where you are. That'll impress whoever who's going to see it or talk about it, and they may think less of whether or not this is really the greatest or right number or not, provided you've got a good way to justify, or in your mind justify or think of where you came out.
Rich, does it let you do a range? Do you know?
Karen, it doesn't. It just has one number you have to plug in, which actually adds a little bit more complexity to our backstory, if you will, because we actually are at a crossroads right now between going this strategic route, raising a smaller round and using it as a milestone because we have an extremely pregnant pipeline right now that just isn't closing yet, versus burning up some more time and some more cash and getting a full-blown Series A, either on the Dreamit roadshow or shortly thereafter. So it really does convolute things when you have to try to fit this into a profile online. It does, lend itself to telling a story. That's where we want to be.
Well, we can always approach Gust if we're finding elements that don't really work. We can always talk to them as well. So, Vidur, you're up next. Vidur from Keratin.
Thank you, Karen. Gentlemen, thank you for all the advice. I think that was some fantastic information. So we are a very young company, and very soon we are going to meet 40-something investors. So as interesting that it is also a little intimidating, because when
Vidur, can you move your microphone? It's a little tough to hear you.
Hello?
Go ahead. Yeah, great.
Is that
Thank
better?
You.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you, Karen. I'll restart. So we are a very young company, and we're going to be on the Dreamit Roadshow meeting 40-something investors very soon. And as exciting that it is also a little intimidating, because our product is still in bare bones. We have a hardware solution as a part of the product. And by the time we do meet them, we might not be able to showcase the entire solution. So 2 questions. How should I structure the discussion when I am meeting those investors? Should it just be that we are here to start the relationship so that we can keep you updated over the next 2 months on how we progress? And what kind of documentation should we be ready with in terms of business plans, business models, because we are also figuring all of that out. It's early stage healthcare startup. We are understanding the American healthcare system, a lot of on-the-job training for us. How should we structure the discussion, and what kind of documents should we be prepared with?
I think that's a great question. And it's another area where I see entrepreneurs sometimes make a mistake. They may not, you have to be true to who you are and where you're at, right? So I think that's the nature of the conversation, and that's the nature of the relationship building that will then turn into fruit for you later on. Whereas if you try and promise too much right now, then that's going to turn investors off. So I think already you are realizing that you're going to be wherever you are, and you don't want to put on too much of a sales pitch ahead of time. So I think it's trying to find ways to involve them in the conversation for how, what they think makes sense for you. Here's our working hypothesis for how we think it might work. But we're interested in your feedback on how, do you think this approach makes sense based upon where we fit within the space, what we're seeing in terms of, potential reimbursement or, whatever the issue is that's impacting the model, right? I think, a fully vetted, baked out business plan is, I think, if that's something that helps you internally, great. I don't think that's something that an investor is really going to be that interested in. I think, whatever it is that's going to tantalize them about the opportunity, if you can execute on it, and then whatever kind of shows them where you are and where you need to go, you can do that in a pretty efficient way through some PowerPoint slides or whatever kind of slides you use, and some sort of basic executive summary.
Thank you.
Having a logical strain to what you're doing is really important. For instance, I have a company that's been out there for 2 or 3 years, and they've been having trouble finding a lead investor for a real Series A. And I know one of the reasons is that, they're promising too much instead of having a very focused approach to what we need to do first. because you can't be great at everything. So you need to be great at something first, and then show them what your path forward is. And at an earlier stage, that's especially important because it's all path forward. So you just want to be able to show, why what you're doing is logical, and you might veer off now and then, but at least they'll know you've thought about what you're doing. Because they're investing in a management team, especially early on, right? They're investing in you and an idea, and they know the idea is going to change because it just does over time.
Exactly. Thank you.
Right. And I think, acting, you give them confidence that you know how to solve or address the problems that you confront. As you mentioned, you may not be going in front of these people with, the full solution able to show them, but, make sure that they understand that you know what milestones you need to achieve and what you need to get done in order to reach your next point. Be convincing in terms of that, and then you're making an investment in you. I'm sure you have a huge market and a banging idea, but they're saying, well, this person knows how to address it, and even though he's not 100% of the way there, he knows what he's doing. That gives me confidence, lowers my risk in investing in you versus someone else.
Great, thank you.
So there's a great article. I don't know if you read yet the First Round Review, but it's First Round Capital's Harvard Business Review for entrepreneurs, and it offers tremendously valuable, actionable advice. There's an article there on managing your board. Now, what you're asking is a little bit different because they're not invested in you and they're not your board, but it's a framework I want you to think about. This is your opportunity when you're out on the road to get people to offer you information, advice, and input. So you need to do your homework on the VCs and investors you're working with and have asks on how they can help you. Don't do it obnoxiously, right? But this is a valuable opportunity for you to open the door to let people to help you. The other thing is structure your information and your slides in such a way of here's kind of our key assumptions, and here's how we're going about addressing them. So it's not that you need to have all the answers, but you're giving the impression of this is what we're trying to address and this is how we're addressing it. So it's very execution oriented. Okay.
Thanks, Darren.
But for an example, they could be invested in a portfolio company that's not competitive with yours, but faced similar kind of healthcare, reimbursement, pricing, regulatory challenges, and you can get their feedback. That's a great ask of how did so-and-so approach this? We're thinking about approaching it this way, but here's our concerns with it and what we need to continue to explore. How have you seen companies deal with this sort of issue?
Sounds great. Thank you, gentlemen.
Okay, so we're wrapping up. This panel was titled Confessions of a VC Lawyer. So is there any confession you'd like to share with us as far as kind of final words of advice to our entrepreneurs out there?
I would say read everything. Lawyers aren't perfect. Sometimes we make mistakes, so it's good to, and you want to understand what you're getting into. So don't just assume that everything is fully vetted. Read everything. And, we all went to law school. We're not necessarily great with numbers. So you always want to look at the cap table too, because, you always, again, it's just the more eyes on the cap table, the better, particularly as it gets more complex.
Thank you for that confession, Jeff. Lawyers do make mistakes occasionally. So, Rich?
Look, I would say that, like Jeff and Dave and I do this all the time, and it's a negotiation. So there's a lot of back and forth, and sometimes it's a bit frustrating. So just go in with your eyes wide open, and your lawyer's going to hopefully educate you on what's going on. And God forbid, I don't know if I'm allowed to say this, but if you don't necessarily need to have VC funding, there's a lot to be said for doing it on your own and then having a big exit that you have the whole pie for. So
you're talking about bootstrapping. So talk about that a little bit.
If you have a business that's going to create some revenues so that you have a source to work leanly, obviously VC investing is important if you need the money to, push it out quickly or grow a market or grab market share, because that's what you want to do. But if you can bootstrap and you own the whole company, right? there are companies obviously in Dreamit right now that have done that for 3 or 4 years. And if you can get away with it, you're not beholden, because VCs, rest assured, they have LPs and they have to get a certain return, and this is their business. And while they're incredibly helpful and want to help you get to that exit, they're taking their piece of the pie to do that. So if you can avoid it, more power to you.
Yeah, I think you have to evaluate when one, can you bootstrap? Is there a way that you can keep the doors open and the lights on? And what are you giving up if you can't do that? Versus what sort of opportunity are you missing, right? So sometimes the rationale for VC financing is that sort of fuel, enables you to grow faster and take advantage of an opportunity that might not be there if you just stick to your knitting and bootstrap. But on the other hand, there have been plenty of companies who have never taken a dime of VC financing who have really grown a long way, and then either successfully exit later on, or then take venture capital that's later stage or PE money to really blow it out later.
Or take money off the table. I mean, that's a great idea. If you can bootstrap for long enough to get a high enough valuation, and you find a VC that's going to allow you to use some of that VC investment to take money off the table, that's a great result.
Dave?
Well, following up on both those points, yes, there are a lot of, I guess the right word for it is non-dilutive sources of funding, even if it's not bootstrapping, particularly if you can work through more strategic people who may be willing to pay simply to test your idea out for a little while. So that's an excellent idea. Certainly put you in a better position when you go to raise funding. As far as confessions, don't hesitate to call anyone, anyone, whether it's Jeff, Rich, or I'm sure we all have the same view. I hate to be left in the dark. Please, if 2-minute conversation, I'm not gonna jack up the bill for that. I mean, but it's better to be informed on our side, to throw ideas off of us. It keeps us, better prepared and also more informed about what's going on. And I think all of us, we're in this because we love startups and businesses. I love the ideas and things like that. And sometimes it's just good to hear what's going on and what you're doing.
So
that's the fun part. The rest of it,
So you heard it here. Read everything. I have had entrepreneurs sign documents that had no idea what they were signing. Ask questions, make sure you understand every part of what you're signing, do the math, ask your lawyers if you don't understand. There's no stupid question, but know what you are signing. So thank you, everyone. It's been a great discussion, and we really appreciate your time.